we're going to go ahead and get started. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Maybe a couple of you could put in the chat box whether you can hear me right now so that we can make sure our audio is working. But we're going to go ahead and get started in just a second. Okay. So welcome to the 2016 Evaluation Instrument Advanced Training. So we'll go for about an hour, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions and answers as well. So I'm going to try to keep it to an hour, but we have until 11:30. Hold on one second. There we go. Okay, so just to give you a little bit about who's in the room, my name is Amanda Borda, and I'm a program manager here at All Chicago. So I'll be doing the majority of the training today. We also have Lauren Seeger in the room as well, and she is a program manager too. She will be sort of looking at my questions in the chat box as they come in so that she can help me know what questions are coming in. And then we also have Jackie Powell, our intern, here to assist as well. Okay. Sorry, I'm having some delay, I think, in my slides, so hopefully they'll work. Okay, so just a bit of housekeeping. You all should be on mute right now. So we can always unmute you if you need to ask a question, but for the most part, we'll take some questions through the chat box. So feel free to send those in throughout the presentation. We'll also have some slides where you can raise your hand and we can call on you with a question. If you are having difficulty hearing us, which you wouldn't hear me right now, but you can always join via the phone. That usually tends to work better than the microphone and speakers on your computer. So if you're having any difficulty or going in and out, it might be better to call in via phone. So again, like I mentioned, we will have some question and answer slides that look somewhat like this. And those will be the times to raise your hand and ask a question. For the most part, you can use that chat box as we go along so that you can just submit your questions, as we're going through the topics. But if you want to wait and ask your question, we'll unmute you and you can just raise your hand. Please keep it to just one question at a time if you can. If you have additional questions, you can always submit those through the chat or email us afterwards. So just some training materials. I did submit a handout here in the webinar if you want to take a look at the slides and print those out and follow along. I would recommend having them in front of you if you can, if you had a chance to print them out. We do have the slides available after the webinar, and we'll also have a recording. So everything will be available just on our website. I know sometimes that can be a little bit funky to navigate. You can just go to Programs and find our Chicago Alliance page, and then you'll find the Federal Funding to End Homelessness page. And that's where you'll find everything pertaining to the evaluation process, including all of those PDF components and the survey gizmo links and the instruction manual, and then that's where we'll post all of these resources afterwards as well. So some of our training objectives today, we just want to make sure that all agents know and understand obviously what the evaluation instrument is, which hopefully, since this is the advanced training, most of you on here should already know. And then we'll talk a little bit about the context, so how it's used to determine funding priorities for Chicago and how it sort of fits into this larger project application process. And then we'll get into the details of actually how to successfully complete it and submit it on time. So just a quick overview of some common terms and acronyms. Most of you should be familiar with these. We have the HARTH Act, which is the Homeless Assistance and Rapid Transition Housing Act. So this is basically the statute that reauthorized HUD McKinney funds and consolidated the SHP and Shelter Plus Care program into one CoC, or Continuum Care Program, which is all of your programs that you'll be submitting for renewal. You'll also note here at the bottom that Shelter Plus Care is also known now as Long-Term Rental Assistance, or LTRA, so we'll use those terms interchangeably as well. Throughout the presentation and throughout this entire evaluation process, we'll sort of be referring to different program model types. So there's HUD program model types, which you can see are the ones that HUD assigns your specific projects. That's permanent housing or permanent supportive housing, rapid housing, transitional housing, etc. But then we'll also be referencing our program models chart. So Chicago has locally established its own program model types. So those go by a little bit different names, such as permanent housing with short-term supports or engagement services. So those we'll be referring to later, and we'll discuss the program models chart at length a little bit later on. But just so you know, we will be referring to different program model types, HUD program model types and local Chicago program models. These are all terms that we'll be referring to just in terms of reporting. So you have your APR, and that's your annual performance report. So that is what you submit to HUD through eSNAPS within 90 days of the end of your grant. And then we also have HMIS, which is our Homeless Management Information System. So that's our database of all of our client information for all programs. And then the Advanced Reporting Tool, or ART, is the reporting tool within HMIS where you'll pull all of that client data out so that we can use it for the evaluation. Your agency technical administrator is known as your ATA. That'll be your one person at your agency who can pull those reports in ART. So a good person to get to know if you don't know who that is. I would recommend finding out soon. That's sort of your one liaison that we have between the HMIS lead and your agency. Now, just to provide some really brief evaluation instrument context, the evaluation instrument itself is developed and updated annually by the HUD McKinney-Vento Committee. So that happened again this year. They worked on it for several months and reviewed it in full. Now, going forward through the charter, we do have a bit of a change in structure and how this will look starting this year. So you won't be referring to it as the HUD McKinney-Vento Committee any longer, and you won't hear that term for long, because it's now going to be the System Performance and Evaluation Committee, or SPEC. And that has an evaluation tool subcommittee that's in charge with looking at the evaluation going forward. So just some new terms you might hear coming up, and you won't be hearing so much HMV going forward. So that committee basically, on behalf of the continuum, develops the evaluation instrument and reviews it based on priorities for the continuum. And then we, in turn, as the collaborative applicant here at All Chicago, we administer that evaluation on behalf of the CoC. So locally, we have a CoC Board of Directors that establishes policies and procedures and priorities for the CoC, and for the funding process as a whole. So they base that on the HART Act and HUD priorities and requirements, and also just locally on our Plan 2.0 priorities. And they mostly do that work through a variety of committees, so including that evaluation committee and HMV, among others. And then one of those committees is also a ranking committee, which typically will utilize these results in determining the ranking priorities. So why do we rank projects? Well, HUD will then, following this process, so this is sort of the local application to the CoC, and then following that, HUD will release the CoC program competition NOFA, or Notice of Funding Availability, which will outline their priorities and their application requirements. So funds through that process are typically competitively awarded, meaning while they usually have enough funding to go around and usually have enough for all renewals, occasionally they don't, which we've seen in the past. And so they usually ask all CoCs to rank their projects based on priorities, locally established funding, and basically policies that are established by that ranking committee. So that's sort of the overview of the process and how the evaluation instrument will be used kind of once it's completed. Okay, so who's required to submit an evaluation instrument? All agencies with a CoC funded project operating between January 1st, 2015 and December 31st, 2015. So if your project was operating in 2015, in order to be eligible to apply for renewal, you'll have to submit an evaluation instrument. Now that includes all former Shelter Plus Care projects, regardless of renewal status. So there are still a handful of Shelter Plus Care projects that don't have a yearly renewal and wouldn't be up for renewal this year, but those still are required to submit. So basically, if you had a project operating in 2015, you do have to submit an evaluation instrument. Now, any agency not interested in renewing their grant coming up for fiscal year 16 should contact us as soon as possible just to let us know so that we can evaluate next steps on that. Now, if you're at all unsure if a project needs to submit an evaluation instrument, I would also contact us at cocprograms@allchicago.org. We have notified a couple of exempt projects, so if you have one and you're thinking it might need to submit, you should contact us just to be sure so that we can all be having the same expectations. So we do have just a quick time for questions and answers just about the general basics and overview of the evaluation. Do we have any questions coming in?
Nope, none at the moment. Well,
oh, wait just 1 second.
people are saying that the audio is not clear.
So we might be having some audio difficulties. You can always try calling in via phone if it's coming in and out. We'll move forward, but I can always change it or adjust if needed. I'll try to speak clearly and hopefully everyone can hear me. All right, so just a little bit about our submission information. Online submission is through surveygizmo.com. We've done that for a few years. That was approved by the committee to be used in place of a paper submission, so that will be happening again this year. So just know that paper submissions are not accepted. So for further information on those submission policies, just review the instruction manual. It has a little bit more information on that. Again, this year, just as in previous years, there will be one agency component and one project component submissions. So you'll have to submit one agency component on behalf of your full agency, and that'll be through a separate link, which is seen there on the screen. And then you'll have to submit a project component for each CoC-funded project that you have. Okay, so there again be separate links for each one. Now, just to give a brief overview of the full evaluation instrument and what it looks like for this year, you'll see that most of the sections, or all of them really, look exactly the same as previous years. So none of the general sections have changed or been altered. So you'll see you have a threshold and additional financial review in the agency component and a threshold in the project component. Those are required for renewal, so they won't necessarily have points attached to them. You'll also see the agency and project certification checklists again, and those follow into the site visit process, which we'll talk a little bit about later. Then you'll have agency governance, project operations, HMIS, consumer focus, leading practices, project performance, and system priorities. So you'll see those are exactly the same as previous years, but you might notice here that the points have been adjusted. So typically questions being removed or added or changed around, higher priorities, lower priorities, the points change from year to year. So you'll see the agency component this year is out of 17 points and the project component is out of 77 points. Now you'll notice at the bottom that's only 94 points. So that's a little bit lower than previous years. Typically it's always out of 100 points. But just note that most projects do have a few questions that might not be applicable. So most projects typically aren't actually scored out of 100 points. So the total is 94. It's a little bit lower. So what does that mean exactly? Well, with less questions and less points, every question is really going to count this year. So the committee reviewed the full evaluation instrument and really took a look at what questions were necessary to ask and what was really important. So we weren't asking questions that were either no longer relevant or no longer in alignment with the priorities. So every question is going to count. Now you'll also see what's new is an increased emphasis on housing first. So you'll see that in the leading practices section. We'll talk about that in a minute. You'll also see that the project performance section will incorporate newly revised outcomes from the program models chart that was revised and finalized in 2014. So in previous years, we had been using the old program models chart, but you'll see that one that's new is now being incorporated into this instrument. You'll also see that we have a custom report. So that's a little bit different. Usually we've used a 625 or a report that was already created in HMIS. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about this once we get to the performance section. But we do have a custom report. So that'll be brand new, we haven't used before, and that will pull all the information you need to submit the evaluation. So our agency component, again, for the threshold section, you won't see any changes there. There's going to still look at the audit and whether you have participation or allow for participation of a consumer on your board or other policy-making entity. So that section should look familiar to you. Under the financial review, one of the changes you will see is that you'll have the same attachments, the 990 and the 941 that you'll have to submit for the financial review, but you will need to submit 2 of your most recent employer's quarterly federal tax returns, so that's Form 941. The question actually remains the same. It's looking at 6 months. So previously we had only collected 1 quarter, which would cover 6 months. So we should have always been really requesting 2. So this year they made that change and are requesting 2 Form 941, so 2 most recent quarters there. Under the agency certification and site visit checklist, you'll see it looks pretty familiar. You might see some minor adjustments to questions or how questions have been combined or separated out, but it has been overall condensed from the previous years, which was informed by our site visit process this year. So you'll just see some minor adjustments in those questions, but it should look mostly familiar. Now, under agency governance, we'll see some new things. First of all, under the committee listing, you'll see that that's been updated to 2015 committees. So that should be answered based on 2015 participation. But then the main noticeable difference will be with this new attachment. So you'll see the question remains the same. So it's the agency has standard policies in place to ensure that continuous quality improvement processes are used to improve project operations. And then it has the list of bullet points in various areas. So this question was actually included previously, and it was just sort of a yes or no question. But the committee really, again, wanted to look at verifying information and making sure that we're really looking at these things. And so this is one area where you will see a new attachment. So now you'll have to actually attach your policy or policies, it could be in several documents, for all of the above. So does your agency have a policy around assessment of project performance? How is it assessed? Who's responsible, et cetera? As well as measurable goal setting for projects. And then does your agency have a policy around data collection and monitoring? Who's responsible for that and what standards are in place for that, et cetera? So for all of these items, we want to see what those policies are that your agency has in place. Now, that being said, since this is a new attachment, the committee was really thoughtful in having conversation about whether this should be included, and ultimately we want to gauge where agencies are at with this, so seeing what's out there. So at this point, there aren't many expectations around what should be in these attachments, and for the first year, we're really just going to be looking and seeing where people are at and where we might be able to provide more assistance. So what's missing? So as long as you're attaching something here that shows your agency's policies around continuous quality improvement, you should be good. I wouldn't stress too much about this attachment. We're really going to be a little bit lenient on scoring because it's really just gauging where people are at and seeing what people are submitting so that we have an idea of what benchmark is to be set. Okay, so if you're finding that some of these aren't in your written policies, then it might be a good time to start looking at that. The only thing I will say about the attachment is that what the committee is not looking for is a narrative explanation. So the attachment should really be your written policies and procedures around these items, and be sort of just a narrative attachment explaining how these happen. If that's all you have, certainly go ahead and submit that, but we will be basing the scoring on what your written standards are. You'll see that the consumer focus and representation section has no major changes. You might see some formatting changes in the questions, but the questions in that section remain the same from previous years. So just a couple of common mistakes on the agency component. We do see a lot of incomplete or insufficient narratives, so be sure to answer all parts of a question. And this is mainly talking about that consumer focus section where questions will ask about feedback processes. So there's one about anonymous process, and then there's one about how your agency has responded to feedback that you've received from consumers. And we really want to make sure that you're answering all parts of the question. So when the question is asking about what an issue is, how the agency addressed it, and how it was communicated, we want to see that all of those parts are in the narrative. Okay, so really be thoughtful about your narratives and make sure you're answering all parts of the question that are being asked. The other thing we see is just attached, missing, or incomplete. So that can lead to just losing points unnecessarily. So make sure to check your attachments. Don't just check to see that something's been attached, but actually click on it, open it, make sure it meets the requirements, and that it's not just your attachment. Maybe you attach just your grocery list or something else that does happen. So just make sure you're opening those attachments, making sure it's the right thing that you meant to attach. Okay, so we'll have some time now, because I'm sure we have some questions coming in with some of this new stuff. So do we have some I can answer now?
Sure. Will there be samples of the CQI attachments posted on the All Chicago website?
All right, so in case you didn't hear it, the question is, will there be samples of the continuous quality improvement? So no, there are not exactly samples, because we haven't actually collected this before. And so really, again, we're just trying to gauge where people are at with this. However, in the instruction manual, you will see there are sort of quick examples of what we're looking for, or a little bit more description on each of those bullet points. So be sure to use that instruction manual. We tried to clarify exactly what we're kind of looking for each of those. And if you have questions, definitely feel free to send those in. I know that's a new attachment, so we're all just kind of trying to figure that one out together. But again, don't stress about that one.
Another question is, are these policies supposed to be for 2015, or can they be developed for 2016?
These should be policies that are already in place at your agency. So again, this question was already in the instrument. So if you've said yes to it previously, why did you say yes? What did you have in mind when you were saying yes to that question? So these should be already in place. And if you're finding that they're not, then yes, I would recommend starting to develop them for this year. And if you are able to develop them, obviously you have 4 weeks to submit this. So if you're able to get that done very quickly, then sure, that would be beneficial to you going forward. So if you already have something in place, great. It should be something you already are doing. But if you're finding you don't have the written policies, then yeah, I would certainly recommend getting started on that.
Those are all the questions we have at the moment.
Okay. So it seems like that's all the questions we have right now. Again, always send us via chat, and we can answer later as well. I'll move forward to the project component. Okay, so our threshold section in the project component will look pretty much the same. You'll see the same questions there. However, one thing I did want to note was that the program models chart question, while it's the same question, it'll still ask about which program model your project is consistent with and why. I do want to make sure that everyone knows that your narrative should now reflect the current program models chart. So be sure you're not describing a program model that no longer exists, that maybe was present in the previous program models chart. So just make sure you're reviewing that new one and really describe how the project is consistent with the description, the essential elements, and everything that's in there. Okay, so if you're having any questions about that, let us know. It is new, and we're all still kind of figuring that new program models chart out, but it has been out for over a year, so it's going to start being incorporated into the evaluation ongoing. Under the project certification and site visit checklist, you'll see that again is just condensed or has minor adjustments. Things were moved around, put together. You should see less questions there. Again, that's going to be slight changes, so nothing too noticeable. Moving on to the project operations section. Match and leverage is one of the big questions here, and that has been adjusted slightly for this year. So the committee really had a thoughtful conversation around this, an extended conversation around this. Given the budget climate and given the state budget, people were very concerned about match and leverage this year. So you'll see that some of the thresholds have been adjusted slightly. And you'll see that the highest threshold is 175% rather than 200. And then you'll also see that the lowest threshold, instead of 50%, is 30%. So the committee really wanted to allow points for anyone going anywhere above the 25% match that's required. And you'll also see that it's out of 5 points instead of 6. So it's a little bit less weight to that question this year, and that was kind of a way to address some of these concerns. Now, that being said, match and leverage is still remaining a priority and remains a priority for HUD as well. So it will remain with a significant amount of points. Now, you see that we do have a 2016 match leverage table, so make sure you're using the updated 2016 match leverage spreadsheet. It'll look very similar to last year. However, there will be an additional tab included that has instructions on how to complete it. So I just want to make sure everyone review that. One of the issues we did have last year is just having a lot of match and leverage spreadsheets incomplete or completed with missing information or information that wasn't matched up. So make sure you're completing that with the instructions given, making sure it's fully complete. And that should be completed using your commitments for the upcoming application. So should the NOFA be released, soon, you're supposed to be completing that based on, what match and leverage you have commitments for going forward. Okay. So again, only match and leverage that you have commitments for. Now you will see under project operations there is a new question, and that's informational. So it just talks about whether you submitted your APR within 90 days of grant end date. So did you submit your APR on time? And this is just really, again, an informational question to see where people are at and to see if there is anything we should be concerned about across the board. This is something that HUD is certainly emphasizing and making sure that you have submitted your APR on time. And so this is really to see if there's anything we do need to address or anything we need to address with local HUD as well. So by all means, if you did have an issue and it wasn't submitted on time, you'll just have to submit kind of a brief narrative explaining what issues there were or why it wasn't submitted on time. But again, this is fully informational. There's no points attached to that. And then under HMIS, you'll see there are no changes. So that'll again look at your data quality process, participation, and your missing data. So those questions should look familiar to you. Moving on to our leading practices section, this will be your other new attachment. So yeah, there are a couple new attachments. This is the second one. So the question again was included in previous years, so it's not a new question. It reads, does the project provide and explain the written eligibility criteria which are in line with Housing First philosophy to consumers? So this question remains exactly the same. Most projects answered yes to this question. I think almost all of them. So for the most part, if you answered yes to this previous years, you should already have your written eligibility criteria available. And now we're just asking that it be submitted for verification to receive points for this question. So again, you should really just have this available. It's just your written eligibility criteria that you provide to your consumers. And again, in the instruction manual, you'll see some guidelines around what we're really looking for here in terms of scoring. But just generally, it should have non-restrictive language and should be in alignment with Housing First philosophy. So it shouldn't have restrictions for income, sobriety, things of that nature. It should really be minimal eligibility that is needed for your specific program. So again, review that instruction manual. It has some details on what we're looking for, but if you continue to have questions, since that's a new attachment, definitely feel free to submit those to CoC programs and we can just take a look at them. Now again, with the Housing First, the rest of the leading practice section will look a little bit different as well. So mostly looking at similar questions that we've reviewed in the past, but it's formatted slightly differently. So you'll see it's formatted to align with the HUD CoC applications. So if you completed the most recent application, it'll look very familiar to you because it looks exactly like what was in the project application that was just completed. So again, you'll have to answer yes to all of those questions to earn points. So we're basically verifying that you align with the Housing First philosophy according to HUD. Now getting into our next section of the project component, you'll see system priorities. There are a few changes and adjustments here. One is that the points have been adjusted for serving chronic homeless and other special populations. So again, we kind of lowered the threshold on that. So you'll get some credit if you're serving at least 25% of those populations in your project. I should note that the chronic homeless definition was just recently updated and finalized by HUD, and so that final definition went into effect January 15th of this year. So given that the evaluation instrument is looking at 2015 calendar year, it won't be relevant too much for this particular process. You'll be looking at who met the old definition during calendar year 2015. However, if you do have questions about that, we do have a webinar coming up on February 9th. So you can always register for that for more information about the updated chronic homeless definition if that applies to your program. So feel free to email CoC programs if you need information for that webinar. But again, for the evaluation instrument, we're looking at the old definition from 2015. So data for that will be taken from the 2016 HUD evaluation report, and we'll talk more about that later, about what that is. And that's the report that we created from HMIS to pull everything you need. So it should automatically give you how many people met that definition that were enrolled in your program last year. So it should be pretty easy. And then for special populations, the question is just adjusted slightly to look at individuals or households. So that was some feedback that the committee received last time, was that it looked only at individuals, but if you had families, you might not have that percentage to get points for that. So it's changed slightly. So now you'll be able to report on households as well. And then you'll see at the bottom the increased points for participation in CRS. It was just 1 point, I believe, last year, and now you'll see that's 3 points. And there is an additional note regarding coordinated access. So while we have a lot of momentum happening around coordinated access, and it's a requirement for all HUD-funded programs to be participating in coordinated access, currently that's considered participation in CRIS or CRS. And that's sort of our coordinated access that we have at the moment. As it's being developed, it's going to change, as we go along. It's going to grow, it's going to change and evolve. So try to stay on top of that. And if you have any issues participating in CRIS, we certainly want to hear about that. But it is required, so that will have a little bit of increased points around it this year. Before I get into the project performance section, since that's a big change, I just want to make sure we don't have any questions to review right now.
We do. So one question is, what if DFSS submits your information in eSnaps?
So is that probably referring to your APR? So for your actual evaluation instrument, you will have to submit your APR. And just like last year, you'll have to get that information from the DFSS, so you'll have to submit your APR. However, for that informational question where it's asking whether it was submitted within 90 days of your grant end date, that will be NA for LTRA projects, so you won't need to answer that question.
And that's all we have right now.
Okay, great. So getting into our project performance and consumer outcome section, we will have a lot of changes here. So I'm going to go through a lot of detail on what that looks like, and then we'll get some information about the program models chart as well, and about that evaluation report I've been mentioning. So all of the section types you'll see in all questions have been updated to reflect the new program models chart and the outcomes to benchmarks that are indicated there. Okay, so you'll see every time that there's a question in the program or the project performance section, you'll see it tied to an exact benchmark that's been outlined for your program type. Now, PSH in all projects questions, scoring will be based on percentiles. So we've used those for a few years now. There's some information in our scoring guide and the instruction manual, so I won't get into too much detail on what those look like. But you'll see some projects are percentiles, some other questions are percent ranges. Percent ranges are set based on the benchmarks, again, that are in the program models chart. So you'll see that you can be evaluated on whether you're meeting those benchmarks, exceeding them, or far exceeding them, or not meeting them. And then all projects of this section will be scored using that custom report. So now just to talk a little bit again about the program models chart, it was updated and approved in 2014. So those are locally determined benchmarks by a committee of the CoC. So that was approved by our continuum as our established benchmarks for these program types. So the difference between the HUD program models and our local ones, you'll see they have some slightly different names. So you'll see interim housing, permanent housing or short-term supports, youth TH, so there's several different youth specific project types, PSH and Safe Haven. SSOs are known as the engagement services in there, and then you'll also see that there's one for rapid rehousing. And again, your scoring will be based on whether you're meeting, exceeding, or far exceeding benchmarks that are in the program models chart. Now, just to give a brief overview of percentiles versus percent ranges, percentiles are based on submissions received. So projects will not be able to know their scores until all submissions are received and scored. Percent ranges are fixed and don't depend on other project submissions. So you can see for those questions, yeah, you might be able to determine exactly where you fall. However, all projects will be impacted somehow by percentile scoring because the questions that apply to all projects are based on percentile given the amount of projects have. And it should be noted that all of the scores are based on what we receive in the evaluation report as well. So everything will be verified to make sure it matches your HMIS data. Now review the scoring guide and instruction manual for more information on the percentile scoring. So there's some examples of how that works if you're still not quite understanding the difference. There are examples in there on what the difference is between those two. So for this 2016 HUD evaluation report, typically in the past you had the APR calculation worksheet and had to do all those calculations manually based on your data. And now basically you'll have a report that will pull out all that information and calculate it for you. And you'll just have to verify that it's accurate. So your ATA will run that report for the dates of January 1, 2015 to December 31st, 2015. It'll add a day just for the prompt, so it should already be set for your calendar year. The project should review all that information as soon as possible, so I would not recommend waiting a few weeks to look at that report. I would run it as soon as possible to make sure that that data is pulling correctly and that it looks to be accurate. So if you need to make some updates to your data, or if you're seeing that things weren't reflected in HMIS, that you have time to make those adjustments. Now, the other part that will be pulled into that report is your bed utilization for your threshold. So if you don't have a bed list in HMIS, you might get a note on there that says you don't have a bed list. So if you have beds, you should have a bed list, and we've created those based on your housing inventory chart submissions. So occasionally there's a reason why you might not have one in there. It's not a huge deal. You'll just need to contact the HMIS help desk to make sure we have that in there so that it can pull your information based on that. Now, projects will be scored on data reflected in HMIS only. So if you're seeing that that report isn't quite pulling things, you'll first want to verify that all the data is in HMIS so that it can pull it out. But if you're seeing that there might be a calculation error, you can always just contact the HMIS help desk or me, and so we can address that. Now, this is a new report, so there might be occasional glitches, but we do want to know if something's not looking correct. So this is just a screenshot of what it might look like. So you'll see the threshold questions up at the top. That's where we're going to look at your bed utilization. And again, it might come up with a note that says you don't have a bed list, and that just means we don't know how many beds you have in HMIS. So if you get that message, just contact us and we'll get it sorted out. You'll also see the system priorities section for chronic homeless. That'll pull in right there. And then you'll see all your project performance and consumer outcomes section. So what you'll do is you'll just click on the tab for your specific program model type, and then it'll list your specific questions that apply. Okay, and it'll automatically calculate those percentages for you. So then you'll just plug them right into the evaluation, of course, making sure that they're actually accurate with your HMIS data. So there will be additional tabs that you'll see that have client-specific information where you can check to see which clients are pulling in for which questions. There are a couple resources we've put on our website. One is the 2016 Evaluation Report Guide, and that basically outlines what is being calculated for each question. So similar to your calculation worksheet from previous years, it'll just summarize each question, what's being calculated, and sort of what the client universe is for each one. Then there's also the 2016 HUD Evaluation Report instructions. So those are instructions for your ATA on how to run and interpret that report. Now again, your ATA is going to run this report, and you'll just have to indicate your provider a date should already be set. So simple prompts, just select your project and only run it for one at a time. And then find your program model type, and then utilize that data to submit your evaluation. Again, questions can be directed to the HMIS help desk, but also keep us in a loop as to any issues that are happening with that. We do want to know, is this in a new report? So questions might arise about it. So please inform the CoC team as well so that we know how to respond to any issues that are coming up, or if there are any known issues around that. Feel free to let us know so that we can all address them together. Now, some common mistakes again about the project component. Just make sure to read and follow all instructions carefully. So again, making sure you're answering all parts of the question. Incomplete match and leverage spreadsheet. I already kind of mentioned this a little bit, but be sure to fully complete it. Be specific about what sources and descriptions for each source of match. If you have any in-kind match, make sure you're indicating yes or no for MOUs for all the sources that you list. And the next one is insufficient narratives. Again, the main one that we see that for in the project component, I would say, is if you have a law or funder policy for an absence less than 90 days that restricts you from having an absence of 90 days or less. You know, sometimes we'll see something like CHA. And so that's just not sufficient enough for us to understand what that funder policy is and how it applies to your program. So make sure you're being specific and providing enough narrative for us to score that appropriately. And then we also see some inaccurate self-report. So throughout the instrument, you might see occasional spots where you have to provide a self-report. And typically we can take that as is, but occasionally there's some that just clearly don't add up. So if you're self-reporting that 20 people remain permanently housed at 6-month follow-up, but there were only 10 leavers eligible for that follow-up, then clearly that's not correct. So we can't calculate based on those numbers. So just make sure that when you're providing a self-report, it matches up with your HMIS data as well. All right, so are there any questions at this time about the performance section? I know that was a lot of new stuff.
So I do have a question that is related to using the central referral system. So this is in relationship to rapid rehousing, and those are receiving referrals via HMIS from the one list. So would that still be considered CRIS?
I think, Lauren, you can go ahead and answer that question.
Sure.
I think everyone heard the question, but it's regarding pulling from CRIS in the one list and whether that counts towards pulling from CRIS.
So many of the veterans that have been placed on the one list were also coming from CRIS. So new veterans who would technically be going onto the CRS list have now been kind of quote unquote weeded out to put on the one list. So this has been a really good pilot to improve our coordinated access system. So yes, I would consider this a yes box, or if you're participating in CRIS.
And just to clarify how that's scored, we do verify with the CRS managing entity. So they will let me know who is sort of signed up in CRIS, who has access to it, and who is actively pulling from it. So if there's any discrepancy, we can always address it. But we do verify it with the CRIS managing entity. So they're aware of all these other moving pieces that are happening. Any other questions? Okay. All right, so just the last final stretch of our webinar here, we'll get into, now that we've covered kind of the bulk of what the instruments look like. Again, a lot of changes, but again, most of the questions remain the same, and it just might be some adjustments in terms of really the project performance section and a couple other spots that might look different with new attachments. So feel free to submit questions about any of that content we just went over. I know that there was a lot, and you might need to take a look at some of the instruments to really absorb some of those changes. Now we'll just go over some of the submission information, how to actually access the online surveys, and how to submit this through Survey. So again, those links that I posted at the beginning, those are available on our website. So there's a separate link for the agency component and the component. That's what you'll use to submit. You'll want to use those PDF versions first and make sure you have all the answers to the questions before going into the online survey. You won't be able to necessarily skip pages in that survey as usual. That's not a capability that SurveyMo has. And so you'll want to make sure that you have everything kind of ready to go by the time you get in there. There won't be any sort of username or password. You'll be able to just head right in there once you're ready and start entering information. Now, once you get in there, you might realize you don't have something that you need, or you might not be able to do this all in one sitting and get everything in there. So you want to save and return, and we do still have that option in there. So all you'll need to do is enter your email address, and a link will be sent to you. I just want to say don't navigate away from the page before you receive the email. Okay, so go sort of minimize the page, go check your email, make sure you have it, and you'll only need to do this one time. So once you have the link, you won't need to save and continue again. You'll have that link and you can use that to enter into your survey any number of times. The only thing that we usually tell people is to just save that email that you get to your computer. So save it, to your desktop or wherever you have that's easier as the name of the project, so you have easier retrieval later, especially for those of you who have multiple projects. I know it can be difficult to keep track of several different links that you might have. So just save one as agency component, save one as project name 1, project name 2, so that you know which link goes to which submission. Okay. Just a quick note about uploading attachments. You will have that same, it'll look just the same as before. So you'll have to browse and find the file and then click here to upload the file. So it's sort of a two-step process. And once it's complete, the file will appear as that gray bar. So if you know that gray bar, it's not uploaded. So make sure you do both of those steps. Don't just browse, but also click here to upload file. Okay, and save your file using the naming conventions that we have in the question. So that just makes it easier for us to know what it is and to just download and save everything easier on our end. Now you will see that you do have some file size limits, so be sure to pay attention to those. They are very generous, so if you're having difficulty, just consult our other survey training that we have. That'll be posted after this afternoon from 4 to 5 if you're able to make it. But otherwise, that training will be posted on our website. And we also do have and some guidelines in the instruction manual to kind of go through how you can condense your file or adjust it. But those file size limits should be far above what you need to submit that particular document. Okay. Just an overview of what those attachments are. Most of these should look familiar to you. They're mostly the same, except for those couple of new ones. The continuous quality improvement policies and procedures. That one will allow you to upload I think up to 6 documents. So if each bullet point is sort of in a different document, you can upload multiple documents for that one. Then for the project component, you'll also see that new written eligibility criteria one, and then the HUD evaluation report in place of what used to be your 625 report that you would submit. So all the other attachments generally look just the same. You have to submit your ADR and then match and leverage spreadsheet. Now, just for the final review, you'll definitely want to click the link at the end to download your PDF. So once you get to that screen with this big warning sign, there will say an option to click the link to download your PDF. You definitely want to do that. And you'll want to review that in full before you hit that submit button. And that includes looking at your attachments. So again, don't just look to see, okay, I've attached something, but actually click on it, go in it, make sure it's complete, make sure all pages are there, that sort of thing, because we did have several last year that ended up losing points just for things like that, where it was maybe just the first page ended up being attached, or it was incomplete, or it was a completely different document. They thought they, had uploaded the right one. So just avoid situations like that where it's just needlessly losing a small amount of points can really add up. So just make sure you're clicking into those attachments before you submit. Make sure they're correct. Now, if you submit prior to the deadline and you need to make a correction, unfortunately, we'll have to resubmit an entire component. So you'll have to basically start it over again. I can't sort of take random, updates to your evaluation instrument just because it would be too difficult to keep track of, and you can't go back into it once you've hit that submit button. So To avoid having to kind of complete it all over again, make sure you're really doing a thorough check and that you're not submitting until you're completely ready and you're sure it's done. Once you submit, though, once you hit that final button, you'll get a confirmation email, and that'll be sent to your primary contact. So in the initial section where you list your primary contact, that's the email address it's going to go to. So if that's not you, it won't go to your email. It will go. You'll have to check with that person to see if they received the confirmation email. And you want to save that for your records. It may take several minutes. Sometimes there is a delay with Survey Gizmo and having it go through your email. Also check your spam or junk folder because occasionally it can go in there. So if you don't receive it after a little while, that one's pretty easy. We can definitely refire that email back out to you. The ones that I should have mentioned can't get to you are those save and continue links. You just have to go back into it and get a new one or start a new component. We can't give out save and continue links. We don't have that capability. But for the confirmation email, that's easy. We can always resend that later. So all agencies are encouraged to submit early to avoid any issues with meeting the deadline. So there are technical difficulties that arise, and our staff is significantly busier in the days leading up to submission, addressing any issues with agencies. So be sure to have everything be at least a little bit early, and don't wait until kind of the last hour, just in case there are any technical difficulties or if something's happening in Survey Gizmo. Do allow enough time to address that with us. And we just recommend that one staff person at a time access the surveys, so it's easier to designate kind of one person responsible for entering it. I know sometimes that might not work out for your agency, but that's just our recommendation just in terms of keeping track of who's entering what information so you don't have multiple versions there. And definitely review and utilize that instruction manual. It's been updated a lot since last year. We tried to really flesh out some of the items that were unclear. So really use that instruction manual and the FAQs that are already posted. We'll be updating those weekly with any questions that come in. But definitely use those resources before contacting us. A lot of times those questions are already answered in those documents. So what is your deadline? The deadline is February 29th at 5 p.m. That's Monday. So make sure you're in by 5 p.m. and certainly we encourage you to submit early if you can. Definitely by that Friday if you're able to, so that we have any time to address any issues. You will have until February 29th at 5 p.m. Now be sure to also review all the submission policies. So there's specific policies around technical deficiencies or when you have missing attachments. And then there's also submission policies around technical assistance and low scoring projects. So make sure you review those so that everyone's aware of what's in there. Are there questions or comments?
Yes, one question is, how do we access the bed utilization report for the threshold 1 question under the project component?
Sure, so that question, again, will be right within that 2016 HUD evaluation report, so you won't have to pull 2 different reports. You'll just have to pull that one report and it'll give you your threshold information, okay? So they'll have your bed numbers in there, it'll have how many people were in your beds, and that will give you your utilization. And we'll also be checking that with your APR just to make sure that that's accurate. Just to make sure we have the correct bed numbers and things like that. But again, run that as soon as possible so that you can make sure your bed list has the right number of beds and that we have the right information to check that, especially because it's a threshold question. So definitely run that as soon as possible. And if there's any question, just let us know.
The other one is, are you able to print out the entire instrument prior to entering?
So you are able to utilize the PDFs ahead of time, so it looks exactly like it does. And you won't necessarily, you'll be able to like sort of download a PDF at the end before you submit, and it will have pretty much all the information that you've put in there. So if that's the question, if I'm understanding it correctly, you should be able to download your PDF and print that out and take a look at it with your staff before submitting. We don't necessarily have a PDF of the Survey Gizmo survey because the questions are already in a PDF format for you. Hopefully that answers that question.
And that is all we have right now.
So just wrapping up here, we're just at 11 o'clock, so we're just getting to the last few slides here. Also, Chicago staff, once these are all submitted and completed, will review over 160 project components and about 50 agency component submissions, so it's quite a lot. And if missing any attachments, a technical deficiency notice will be issued right away, so we'll kind of take a look at those sooner rather than later, and we'll let you know if anything's missing in terms of the attachments. And then you'll have to respond within a few days, just letting us know that you're working on that and are going to be getting it in, and we'll determine a deadline. There is a half-point deduction for any missing non-threshold attachments. So make sure you're reviewing those submission policies, and make sure you're avoiding any, loss of points for things like that that can be avoided. So make sure you're checking those attachments. Now, scorecards will be tentatively issued by March 15th. So that's kind of the date I'm setting and committing to at this point. That gives us a couple weeks to review all those. Of course, things do come up and there might be delays or issues, so that's a tentative date, so don't hold me to it. But I will stick to that date as much as possible, and it should be around March 15th that you see your preliminary scores. Okay, and make sure to review your scorecards once you receive them, and there will be additional notes if needed to inform, where your scoring came from, and so be sure to take a look at those and review them thoroughly. Now, again, just a couple of those submission policies I wanted to note. Project falling below 2 standard deviations from the average will be put on funding probation, which just means that you'll automatically receive a site visit and will be providing technical assistance. So basically, that just means, you're falling pretty low from the average, and we want to address any issues with you. But project scoring standard deviations, again, the following process may be up for reallocation or may be at risk. And so you really want to make sure that you're looking at your scores from last year, looking at your scores from this year, and making improvements as you go along. That being said, to give a little bit of a update, I'll kind of go through this real quick. The site visit process was implemented last year, so for the first time, we did develop a site visit process with a subcommittee, and so 3 low-scoring projects were automatically selected. So those kind of scoring 2 deviations below, and then 3 additional projects randomly selected for a site visit that occurs between May and October. So that'll probably happen again this year, and you'll be notified at least 30 days before if you get a site visit. So additional information will be provided about what that looks like, but it incorporates a consumer engagement session, it incorporates a peer provider interview, and then the documentation review of your checklist. So keep an eye out for that. You might get selected. If you're low scoring, you certainly might be selected for a site visit. So if you get your scorecard and you don't agree with the score, we certainly want you to contact us first with any questions about your scores. But there is an appeals process and an opportunity to appeal your scores. So this year, since the CoC charter was implemented, there is a slightly different structure of how appeals work. So All Chicago will review all initial score appeals, and will basically people that are with All Chicago but did not review, so it won't be me, and it won't be Lauren who will be doing the majority of the review of the evaluations. We will have other people reviewing those appeals to make sure that scoring was completed accurately according to the scoring criteria that was outlined, and that a change can be made. So then there's additional information in the instruction manual about what happens beyond that. So there's a few different steps for appeals, but there will be an opportunity to file an appeal, and it'll be first reviewed by us. Now, I do want to say that if it's just maybe a calculation error, or you think something was adding up wrong, certainly just contact us first. Occasionally, we can just adjust the score if it was just incorrect, or if it was just a mathematical error. Those happen. Definitely contact us at CoC Programs if you have any questions about your scores, or why you were scored a certain way. I'm happy to discuss that at any time. We'll send out more information with your scorecards on how the appeals process works, so you'll get details on that. But just a final note about final scores. If agencies are affected by an appeals or appeals and your score changes, we'll submit you a final scorecard. Otherwise, you will get a final scorecard that basically reflects your preliminary score if nothing had been appealed and nothing changed with your score. Final scores, again, are typically sent to the ranking committee. They usually request those scores or aggregate those scores or what have you. They change from year to year, but it could be used as one of the criteria to determine ranking policies. All right, so we're just finishing up. I think that's everything we needed to cover. So just one final reminder, 5 p.m. February 29th, that's your deadline. There are no late submissions accepted as usual. So be sure to mark that on your calendars. Some contact information. Again, that CoC program's email is really our preferred contact. That's usually the easiest way to get a hold of us and for us to sort of manage and prioritize responses. We are not always at our desks. We are in meetings, so phone is not always the best. You can leave a voicemail, certainly, but that CoC programs will make sure that we get to you as soon as possible through there, because multiple people can receive it at the same time. I'll be your main contact, and I'm at extension 22, but you can also reach out to Lauren. She's happy to answer any questions as well. She's at extension 35. Just keep in mind that our business hours are 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday. And we do get sort of an influx of questions at this time, so especially leading up to, so in those final days leading up to that deadline, it may take a couple days for us to get to, just the volume of questions that we get. So be sure to utilize those resources first. You may already have an answer to your question available, so check those before reaching out or while you're waiting for a response. Are there any final questions before we close out for the day? We might have some in the chat that we can respond to later if they were project specific. But if there's any that apply to everyone, feel free to raise your hand if you'd like as well. Submit through the chat box. We do have time for Q&A if needed. Okay. I'm getting silence, so hopefully that means we've addressed most of your questions so far. But I do want to emphasize, use those resources that we have. Those are all on our website. But we're happy to answer any questions. So if there's anything that's confusing, unclear, do feel free to submit those questions to us or give us a call. We're happy to go through anything, especially with any of those new things that are changed from previous years. I know that can be a little bit confusing the first time we start implementing stuff. So definitely if you're confused by any of those new attachments or how the report is pulled or anything like that, reach out to us and we're happy to answer those. All right, given no questions are coming in, I'll do my final reminder, 5 p.m. on February 29th, that's your deadline. Make sure you get those agency and project components in via Survey Gizmo by 5 p.m. Okay, thank you everyone.